Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing another really awesome guest involved in creating a better and safer tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Erin Maurer, who is the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense Lead, J3 Force Protection Directorate at NATO's Joint Force Command in Brunssum, the Netherlands, a position that she's held since July of 2024. Lieutenant Colonel Maurer originally enlisted in the United States Army Reserves back in 2004, and upon graduating from Penn State in 2008, commissioned as a second lieutenant through the Reserve Officers Training Corps program, and was branched in the Chemical Corps. And her assignments over the years have included being a brigade chemical officer, company executive officer, and forward operating base operation officer for the 4th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, Fort Stewart, Georgia. Also headquarters company commander, support battalion, 1st Special Warfare Training Group, Airborne, AFRICOM and EUCOM desk officer, United States Army Special Operations Command, as an operations officer and battalion executive officer, Special Troops Battalion, 528th Sustainment Brigade, and also as United States Army Exchange Officer to the UK's Defense CBRN Center. Lieutenant Colonel Maurer holds a master's degree in strategic security from the Joint Special Operations Program at National Defense University, with a defense that was defended thesis focused on military response to nuclear terrorism. And she has also deployed in support of both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn. And then just a little for the background, the J3 Force Protection Directorate, or also known as J3 Operations, you may see in the movies and so forth, is a really critical component within the military joint staffs, responsible everything from planning, coordinating, executing various operational plans and security measures and threat protection. A lot to get into today. Really honored to have her with us. A lot of really cool topics. Lieutenant Colonel Erin Maurer, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Ira, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this. It'll be exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some of these topics we've touched on, but a lot we have not, and really looking forward to have a great discussion with you. Would love to start out maybe going back to maybe 2008 or so. You're down the road here. You're studying psychology. You're studying biology at Penn State, and your first sort of move is into the Chemical Corps. And this is although it's called Chemical Corps, you are responsible for much more than the C part of CBRN. So you're responsible for all the hazards, whether it's weapons, terrorism, industrial accidents, everything in between. Take us back a little bit. I mean, talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up, a little bit about your early interest, and what got you interested initially in the Chemical Corps.
Sure. Oh, that's a lot of things to go back. So I actually am a Marine Corps brat. My dad was a Marine for 20 years, and then we lived half our life in 29 Palms in California. And then when he retired, we moved back to Pittsburgh, where his family is from. And so that's how we transplanted from California to Pittsburgh. That was a huge change. I don't recommend that very often, but it was a good way to exit the Marine Corps and kind of become normal kids again, my brother and I. And I thought about joining the Marine Corps, to be honest, but my dad said, Erin, you are far too nice, and there are far too many options out there for you. Please go to college. Please, look at everything available. And so I ended up at Penn State. I had ambitions of going to main campus, but their biology program at Penn State Behrend was higher academically than it was at main campus. And so why move all the way across the state when I can just stay there? And I had started in their biology program because I had every ambition from the time I was 2 to be a veterinarian. That's all I ever wanted to be. And I had worked in a veterinary clinic during high school to try to make sure that's what I wanted to be. Left for college, said, yeah, that's still for me. But turns out I am not amazing at math. So you have to flip something, and I didn't want to waste all my parents' money. So I was part of the ROTC program, and it's something called simultaneous membership that's not usually most people don't know about it. It's kind of a best kept secret. And so I had enlisted after my freshman year of college, went away during the summer to basic training and AIT. And when I came back, I was eligible for the ROTC program. And for the last 2 years of school, I was on an ROTC scholarship, which was guaranteed commissioning. And at that time, we were in the surge in Iraq. So it just seemed like the right thing to do. If I had already considered joining the military before college, why not consider it when I can do both at the same time? And it was probably one of the best things I did. And so when I switched to psychology, I took massive course loads to try and catch up on the psychology side, but I didn't lose my biology credits that way. And so it was a complete shift on what do I want to be. I was never committed completely to being a psychologist because I didn't want to be a therapist and I didn't want to be a psychiatrist. I said, well, if I'm going to do psychology professionally, I want to be a researcher. I'd rather look at how does the brain function? Where do we get to where we are? And then make sort of advances in that regard instead of just no downplay to therapists and psychiatrists. They play a massive role in everybody's lives. But that just wasn't for me. And about the time that I commissioned, the Chemical Corps in the Army had started an initiative to say, we keep picking people out of any career, like any major in college, but maybe we would be better suited to start focusing our intent on those hard chemistry, hard biology majors. And so my year and a couple of years after were the first time they started to say, maybe we should look at people who have an interest in the sciences, because then they're going to be a more professional chemical branch. And so I had asked to be an MI officer, and I was promised to switch to MI after I made captain. It's a branch detailing program. And I was in Iraq in 2010, and I said, gosh, that looks really boring. They sit in their little skiff without any windows, and they just read things. And gosh, if they get it wrong, they get it really wrong. And I wasn't committed for that again. And so I voluntarily stayed in the chemical branch. And I think it's probably the best thing I've ever done, because it is truly something I enjoy fully. I say I hope to never retire doing my job in real life, because horrible things are happening if I am doing my job in real life. But I love the defensive half of planning and things like that. So that was that strange pathway that got me to Chemical Corps as a branch, and then staying for now almost 20 years.
No, that's awesome. And again, looking at, talking about the education, obviously they want to pick people like you that, hey, we're interested in these sciences, but they really, give you a lot of specialized education, chemistry, biology, radiological sciences, a lot of toxic industrial chemical stuff, as well as all the doctrine. it's interesting because a couple of years later, obviously you have the very important deployments, as you're mentioning. Eventually, you get to National Defense University, and your focus here, as I mentioned in the bio, is on nuclear terrorism, which is an extremely scary topic. And we've profiled. We had Diane Diulis on from NDU Center of Weapons of Mass Destruction a couple of years ago, talking about some of these scary topics, and again looking at sort of the layout of some of the stuff they taught you here, everything from the type of threat actors and improvised nuclear devices and dirty bombs and everything in between. Again, take us into the world of how sort of tell us a little bit about your experiences here. Obviously, getting into those sensitive details. There are aspects of the topic of nuclear terrorism that are more interesting, those that are misunderstood, and just how your thesis topic sort of fell in your lap and why you chose specifically nuclear terrorism.
So NDU and specifically the JSOMA program were kind of a highlight. I was the first chemical officer to ever get accepted to that program. And I hope I'm not the last, because I recommend it always to any chemical officers that are looking for an ILE equivalent that's different than the normal path. Most of my career has been deviations from the normal path, and Branch says, "Oh, I don't recommend that." And I'm like, well, I'll try it out. The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. Okay. So NDU is one of those deviations where they said, we don't think you should do this. You should go to traditional ILE. You should, get the Webster's master's degree. And that works for a lot of people. But for us as a family, my husband and I had 2 daughters at the time, and I was pregnant with a third. The ability to stay in one place was very tantalizing. And so I applied and I got accepted, and it was only 4 women in the program. It was very much an imposter syndrome. I hadn't been to school in 10 plus years, 15 years. And we were doing a 1-year intensive thesis program. So you're getting an entire master's degree in 1 year, and you have to write a thesis and defend it by the end of it. So it was a fantastic year, but it was probably one of the most trying years I have ever had. The program was phenomenal. The people in the program, as much as the professors, really made all the difference. My thesis advisor and my second reader were fantastic in pointing me through how do I make an unclassified thesis. I really didn't want to make a classified thesis and then risk losing it, because the information I felt was very important. And I had promised that if I got into this program, I would write something for my branch. It would kind of be a return on the favor of them letting me go to something that was non-traditional. And so there's a lot of things that in CBRN that don't get the full weight of interest. Mm-hmm. We do talk about the everyday things. And at that point, 4th generation agents hadn't come about as a discussion point either. But I think going forward, they would have been something that was tantalizing as well. So I said, well, nuclear just feels like nobody talks about it. Mm-hmm. And something that I think is, I had a captain that last year that was working for me, and his best way of describing it is, we keep saying deterrence is working because we haven't had to use it. But we don't actually have a good measure of deterrence. So there's mm-hmm. no measures that say it is actually working, or we just haven't met the threshold to have to deter them some more. And it's hard to explain. I think I've maybe not done an excellent job of paraphrasing him. But that was kind of the reason for the nuclear terrorism topic for a thesis, because overarching, we don't have an entity that is responsible for a nuclear incident. It's more which is the first one on the scene, and they are going to take lead, and then everybody falls in line. But as an overarching sort of umbrella, it's not it's not so much there. And the Department of Defense, it has a role, but it has a limited role. And the discussion was, because I was sitting at a special operations program, it was, where does the special operations program fit in that? And then the very blandest of terms, they do have a role, but it is very limited, and it is going to be before the fact, not after the fact. So I nearly didn't have a thesis because buying the research material for that thesis proved really problematic. It was easy to download a lot of things. But when it came to buying the books, Amazon has a fantastic filter on where they said, no, you've bought too many really sensitive books. You can't buy anymore. And so I had to get the school to send them a list or a memorandum that says she really is studying this. She's a real person and she has no nefarious intents. And so their compromise was, well, you can only buy 3 in a sitting now. I was like, oh, thanks. I will have a thesis, but I will promise not to break Amazon's laws. So it was a really heavy thesis too. It felt really, I was just weighed down by it. And honestly, I took a lot of cases because we don't have case studies of nuclear terrorism. There are no vignettes of things planning. The closest we have is things that might have happened with Al-Qaeda. You could even take Fukushima. I use Fukushima as a vignette, but there weren't actual vignettes of a nuclear terrorism incident and how it would manifest from start to finish. And so I wrote a vignette that came out of a shipping container through the port, the Red Hook port in New York City. And so it felt so wrong to write a thesis that said in a second, I could kill 1 million people. And it wouldn't have been that hard. And that was really, it was heavy, but it was really eye-opening to say, once again, deterrence is working and we're relying on deterrence to keep people from doing these things, but will we be able to do it forever? And that was kind of the end note of the thesis, was we have to get some sort of governing plan in place when it happens, not if, but when. So that's how it's
no, it's again, you know, and as you know, I've had other guests on the show that have sort of, you know, given us the, you know, they're involved in sort of, you know, the different exercises if something does happen over here, whether it's biological, radiological, or what have you. But yeah, I mean, it's important. And again, I take my hat off to all the NDU graduates like yourselves that have to think about these issues and write such papers that you don't really need to write. But yeah, it's also good seeing, you know, Amazon, because when we had a couple of years ago, we had Angela Sheffield on, who was at the National Nuclear Security Administration doing stuff with AI, and like sort of the person behind the scenes that, like, if my kid, you know, is Googling how to build an atomic bomb, you're like, you know, this is a high school project and not something else. But no, it's good to see all that in play. So it's very interesting, and nonetheless, you know, a very important sort of part of your story and arc. So I appreciate that. Yeah, let's talk about what happens next, because this is also really interesting in the sense that you are sent abroad as a United States Army exchange officer for the United Kingdom's CBRN Center, and you're at a location, it's got a kind of interesting name, of the Winterbourne Gunner, which is the location of sort of the UK's equivalent to our CBRN school here for the Army. And this is not, you know, again, sort of reading about it, you're not just sort of a liaison that's, you know, over there hanging out doing something. You're fully embedded within the UK's military at this point, and you have real duties and responsibilities equivalent to what you had prior. talk a little about this. I mean, explain what an exchange officer is, what you do, how you got chosen for this, and a little bit of, I guess if you can compare and contrast some of the, I don't know if the right word is doctrine of how the UK versus the United States goes about thinking of these issues, things you learned. Again, take your time with this one.
Yeah. So it was probably one of my favorite assignments. I fell into it accidentally again. Keep taking deviations. I had been sitting in USASOC assignments within the special operations community for almost 10 years at that point, and I had to find something different. They said, you can't stay on Fort Bragg anymore. Find something. And I was a week and a half from the marketplace closing, and everybody has made their decision almost at that point. And so I went in and I said, oh, what is available? What is interesting? And the exchange job is listed in that marketplace as being in DC. And for my husband's professional career, that was a great location. Mm-hmm. And it took us away from Fort Bragg. It felt like the next step. And I applied. I did one interview. I spoke with the program manager and he said, this is not in DC. This is in England. You will not come to DC. You won't see DC. You are in England and you are on your own. I said, well, shoot, we've been in special operations. We can do this. We can be on our own. And you truly are on your own. There is 33 exchange Army billets in the UK right now. And I think a total of maybe 70 across all of Europe. So there's not many, and those are just Army. There's some for the Navy, some for the Marine Corps, and I believe a few for the Air Force as well. But you are on your own. So we turned up, had no idea what to expect. They completely embraced us as a family. We stayed in UK MOD housing that's tagged for the exchange family. Turns out that the exchange program was one of the original exchange programs that they had. So my exchange position had been in existence since 1947. So it was a long-standing agreement, and it spoke to how valuable it was to each nation. And so, an officer from the UK, they don't have a chemical branch; they have a specialty regiment, but they do not have anybody that does chemical or CBRN professionally. They, for a while, had a joint regiment, so they'd pull from all of their branches into one regiment, but that didn't last because it's very difficult to maintain that kind of thing based on their structure. So they didn't have. So everybody there has this as an additional duty. And so it falls under the engineering corps at the moment, the Army Engineering Corps for the UK. It was previously under the Royal Air Force, and it changed in about 2019. So the Royal Engineers have only had it a short period of time. It's Winterbourne Gunner is a tiny little picturesque village just outside of Salisbury, situated between there's DSTL, which is their Defense Science and Technology Laboratory down the road, and then Salisbury, it's a city, but it's really a town by our standards. And it's gorgeous, picturesque, thatched houses everywhere. And we got brought in and we spent the 2 years there. We tried to extend for a third year because we loved it so much. Just fully immersed in their military. So I spoke on behalf of the UK MOD at a conference to talk about gender issues in CBRN. They thought highly enough of me to allow me to work on some specific exercises on their behalf, as well as helping to modernize doctrine. So because nobody does CBRN professionally in the UK, and it's not to knock them, it has to be different because it has to be different for every nation. they had not done a modernization. There were initiatives in place, but it takes time. And if you keep changing people out routinely, then you can't get that sort of push towards it. So they've done an excellent job of the normal day-to-day doctrine, but we dove into the specialty things. So we looked at extreme cold weather, CBRN. How do we revive that doctrine? We looked at non-traditional CBRN, non-traditional decontamination. So it's very uncomfortable to tell a bunch of infantrymen to go stand in the middle of a field and spray themselves off and change their clothes and be a huge target that's not a protected target like a hospital. They resist it very strongly. And so we said, let's try other things. What else can we try? And so I had a fantastic team of people to help me design things that we just tried them out. It was the most tangible idea to implementation I've ever had in my career, where we said, hey, we tried it, it worked, so let's write it into doctrine. And we would take it straight to the units. And because of how easy it is to go say, hey, I have this idea, would you guys be willing to try it out? And then we'll make sure that you get credit for it. So every Wessex SORM that we already had to go out and evaluate, we said, hey, would you try this while we're out here? Or you're here at the center to get validated for something. Could you try this out? So we also looked into, how do you do decontamination in complete dark? Because CBRN also, for most countries, is a daytime activity. It's not a nighttime activity. And so we said, how little light can we use to achieve this and get ahead of this problem, so we don't have to wait till daylight hours? We can start decontamination as early as possible. And so those were some of the initiatives that I worked on there with wonderful people. And I highly recommend anybody look into it, because it is probably one of the best jobs you'll ever have. There's so much warmth and welcome and appreciation for the exchange officers anywhere in the UK, but also in France and Italy and wherever. So it's just, it was probably one of my favorite assignments.
No, it sounds like an awesome assignment. And you made me think of something, because you brought up you said that Defense Science and Technology Lab, sort of the UK's DARPA, is sort of a little down the road from where you were. And it just got me thinking, and we can get into this too when we get to the current NATO assignment. But as you're in these roles, and again, you're thinking about countermeasures, whether they're, for nuclear or biological, whatever the case may be, are you interfacing with the DARPAs and the DITRAs and ASPR and some of these different groups that has, works on all the countermeasures here, but, you're the one that really has to operationalize these in the field? Can you say a couple words about that? Because we profile all those folks, it'd be interesting to see how you liaise with them to say, hey, here's an interesting thing that we need to try in this particular experiment, this particular trial. How does that all work? If you can tell us a little bit.
It is complicated, and I will be honest that I don't know the full process by which they get it from the researchers to the frontline units. But from my time at DCBRNC, there is an excellent exchange between the center and DSTL, and DITRA also integrates with DSTL, as they're both research organizations. I didn't work with DARPA there, but I'm sure that there's probably a partnership. But DSTL would work on a program, and then they'd say, hey, we'd like to do this, and bring it out to the force. And so the center would receive it, because we could do the testing at the tactical level. And so we would bring over things that we just wanted to see if they would work or if they wouldn't work. Decontamination apparatus, we would try those out and say, it's too complicated, or it's too heavy. Countermeasures, there's new countermeasures all the time. And we said, that's great, but you can't it freezes in the pocket, or it's too complicated to hold it. And so we definitely took the science side of it and said, this is how the end user will approach this topic. For example, we had a number of new countermeasure auto injectors that we were looking at, and they were trying to bring on board. And so I had the opportunity to go up to Umeå, Sweden, to their extreme cold weather course. And I said, okay, I want to take these, not the real thing, but the test products with me. Just want to see how they work up there. And it was so cold. But we got to a solution where we said, this will work. You can use them. They fit perfectly. And even with the giant mitten gloves on, I can still get it and I can still use it. So that was one of those kind of success stories where we went from conceptual to real time. Hey, this would work in the Arctic. Let's bring it on. There's a great partnership there.
Yeah. No, again, you don't think of things like that, but you don't want the auto injector countermeasure to turn into an ice cube. We have to use it. Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And again, it looks at sort of the details of what you have to take into account and think about as you operationalize these countermeasures. But yeah, that's very interesting. So we've gone from Pennsylvania to Fort Bragg to the UK. Now we're going to head to the Netherlands. And before we get into what you're doing now per CBRN, let's talk about where you are, because you are at NATO's Joint Force Command. This is in Brunssum, Netherlands. It's sort of one of those places that we hear very little about in the headlines, but a lot goes on there in terms of it's, one of our three, I believe, operational commands in NATO. So a lot of stuff happening. Can you just explain what NATO JFC Brunssum is all about, and then we'll drill down to specifically CBRN after that.
So it is in a really great area, about 2 hours south of Amsterdam in Limburg province. It's like the West Virginia of the Netherlands, according to the Dutch. That is not, I didn't make that up. The Dutch say this is the West Virginia of the Netherlands. We've been asked, why do you live there? NATO's there. So the Joint Force Command at Brunssum is built over top of an old mine, and it moved there after the NATO headquarters needed to move out of France. So it's been there, I think, if I remember correctly, my history, the 70s, possibly the 80s. But do not quote me on that. So there are 3 JFCs, and they all fall under SHAPE's leadership. So Supreme Headquarters Allied Partners Europe. I think that's SHAPE's acronym. I just call it SHAPE. Sorry. So there's one in Naples, there's one here, and then the newest one is standing up in Norfolk, Virginia. And that will be a splitting of the responsibilities for the North Atlantic. So, and because we've expanded, NATO's expanded over the last couple of years, we now have Sweden and Finland that have joined, which has been a great addition to NATO and the alliance. It's brought a whole new dynamic into all of our exercises and how we approach every sort of defense plan by having those 2 nations as a part of it. And Brunssum has the responsibility for the center region of Europe. I can't specifically say the nations that are in that center region, but it's the center of Europe that we have responsibility for. And then Naples has the southern, Norfolk has the northern. We have the most nations to liaise with, which can be a challenge. I mean, NATO is a challenge in itself, but also a really great alliance. Something I had not valued until working for them. It takes 32 nations to make a decision, which for Americans or a single, people who have worked in a single organization where one country makes a decision, it can seem so slow, but there's a reason that you have to make decisions slowly, because everybody comes at it from a different cultural perspective, history, financial perspective, and the decisions are made after weighing them considerably. So it's a great place to work. We call it a warfighting headquarters as well. So underneath it comes a number of corps that, should we ever approach a conflict, we would be that buffer between SHAPE's strategic level planning and operational level actions that then translate down to the tactical level corps and divisions and brigades.
And and along those lines, because you again looking at what a CBRN lead does there, again, responsibility across developing the op plans, the exercises. Again, there's these NATO centers of excellence that you have to coordinate with. As you were mentioning, this is unlike where you're just dealing with the UK for your previous assignment. You've got many countries here that you have to sort of integrate in all of this. Again, sort of, if you could just talk a little bit about sort of what collective CBRN responsibilities are, and then if possible, again we've profiled some of the like with General McGonigal. We talked with her about sort of some of the exercises in preparing locally here in the U.S. for if something really bad happened here in New York City or whatever. Any interesting sort of exercise stories you could tell us that are not confidential, that where you brought in a couple different countries and and whatever. I'll let you go with it.
Yeah. So the CBRN section at JFC Brunssum has the responsibility to first and foremost advise our commander on CBRN defense. And we have to make it very clear that it is defense. We cannot provide offense for CBRN. Obviously, we hold ourselves to a higher moral standard in NATO and most nations that we are not going to employ any sort of CBR, and the N is its own category of offensive discussion. But for the CB&R, NATO and the nations within it do not do any offensive planning. We do purely defensive. And that's great, because you want to be on the defense for that. So advising our commanders, number one, but then also helping the nations. We liaise with each of the nations. We have, since 2022, there's been a fantastic bridge between each of the nations and the NATO JFCs to communicate the capabilities, the planning, every exercise that we conduct, they're invited to, and discussions constantly with them about what the expectation will be if NATO goes to conflict for their nation, for CBRN. And then we do a lot of exercise and doctrine. It's best to exercise something. I used to think exercises were really, really boring and that they didn't serve the same purpose that everyone kept pitching that they had. But realizing now, maybe matured a bit, to say that exercises serve its place, because if you try it out and it's really terrible in an exercise, you can make the changes and you can get ahead of it for the future, specifically for doctrine. So we write one of the annexes in the regional plan, which is our approach to defense for NATO for the central region of the AOR. And for the CBRN portion, the nations each come with different capabilities. We try to help ease the discussion of interoperability with them. We found a number of cases where things are not interoperable. And so you have to know who does what, who can do what, and have permissions in place in order to cross-level or cross-conduct things with different nations. And so, if you want to use a specific decontamination agent on another nation, you have to make sure that they're okay with it. So we try to help ease that. And then nations also have a different perspective on how they structure their CBRN elements for their own country. So some nations approach it from, we have a specialty regiment and that is all we have in the military for CBRN, and nary the two shall meet with the general purpose force. Or they approach it from, I have combined my civil capability with my military capability, and they share the responsibility for anything CBRN. And so if you get one, you get the other. Or they say, we just do not have that yet because we have to prioritize things that are more important to warfighting than CBRN, because we have this balance between probability and risk. So the risk and the effect is astronomically high usually, but the probability is always very low. And so you have to balance. For some nations, those are choices they have to make still. And so we can't expect them not to. And so through NATO, the hope is that we can ease that burden. So, hey, we know you're working on it. And in the meantime, this is the plan, just in case. So we spend a lot of time on that. And then we spend a lot of time, like I said, on exercises. We are a part of every major exercise. NATO and the US have both said every major exercise that we participate in should have an element of CBRN. So for us, that's just like we're on an upswing. Usually for years, CBRN community has been, nobody cares, NBC, or CBRN, it could be right now. And we have these cute little cliche acronyms that we use, but since 2022, we have been on a major upswing. And so my advice is always, we need to capitalize where we are. Until we're on a downswing again, we need to capitalize now and get everything we've been asking for. So just pitch it every chance you get that, hey, we can afford to spend a little bit more here, or hey, we could really use a modernization there. And so we help the nations get to that. We also help them liaise into the exercises. So they do a lot of cross-nation exercises for CBRN, things like Loyal Leda. There's always Brave Bedouin, and those are more tactical level exercises where the nations work together on an initiative for CBRN. And we come and observe, but we don't help plan those. Instead, we work on Steadfast Duel. So JFC Brunssum has a fantastic social media presence. So you can go and find there's pictures from Steadfast Duel. That was in October, where we had a really fantastic, really realistic exercise. And for the first time in a very long time, we had a CBRN inject that was a challenge for the headquarters, but the headquarters rose to that challenge and realized that this is not going to stop us from achieving our plans. So in the past, a lot of people believe, oh, CBRN's been thrown, the whole thing's off, we're all dead, we're just going to be done. And with the help of the Joint Warfare Center out of Stavanger and our partners at SHAPE, and then our partners at JFC Naples, we crafted a scenario that got played out that showed a lot of people that CBRN can be incorporated into an exercise in a realistic fashion, and it is not going to derail your exercise. You are not going to have to stop everything and quit. You can fight through it. And so that was a major turning point for my headquarters, I think, planning wise, because now people come and say, oh yeah, we do want you to be a part of this discussion, and we think we're going to add it to the next exercise. And the reason we're meeting today and not tomorrow is because tomorrow I leave to go to SHAPE for 2 weeks to do Steadfast Wolf. And Steadfast Wolf it's in its infancy. It's a partnership exercise between USUCOM and SHAPE, where we take the exercise Steadfast Duel, but we do a deviation, and we throw all the terrible CBRN that nobody wants to do that really would derail the exercise into it. And we say, how do we make the decisions? Who do we need to talk to when we're doing it? What do the nations have to contribute? And we test our plan. It's it is a really heavy, I think most of CBRN is heavy, but to try and fit all of that into a 5-day period is a challenge. And the exercise planners from EUCOM and the shape planners do a marvelous job of making sure that we can get all the objectives that we've laid out ahead of time, where we say, I want to talk about sustainment problems, I want to talk about med problems, and they get it all in that exercise and throw all the bad stuff. The nations attend, and it's probably my favorite exercise that we do. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was reading a bit about that before. Well, actually, I guess the one they did last year. And it's kind of interesting because it leads into my next question for you. And that's sort of the innovation and the emerging technologies theme. And I know in Steadfast Wolf 2025, there was a major part was about AI and advanced technologies to obviously to assist autonomous systems. Erin, what do you think about in terms of emerging tech? What gets you excited? Whether it's advanced sensing technologies, the AI, obviously robots and autonomy, very important. Decontamination tools we talked a little bit about, but would love to hear a little bit about again what excites you, what you're not that happy about, and where you think some of this technology and innovation should be going to again make sure not everybody dies instantly.
Yeah. So I am a split mind on tech advance for things in the military. I love AI. I think that AI is incredibly helpful and it has its place, probably in immediate decision making. So the AI that we tried out at Steadfast Wolf last year, the intent was for helping commanders make a decision faster. While we get the time and the latitude to go refine our assessments, he can make decisions or she can make decisions from the get-go. And that was very beneficial, where they can reference doctrine at a second's response, and they say, okay, this is the next step I need to be making, or this is the thing I need to consider. And they'll ask the questions that are very generic questions, but they eat up the SME's time. To constantly be providing a brief to the commander on, well, this is what CBRN does, and this is what you can expect.
Right.
So the initial assessments and the initial information gathering can happen for a commander very quickly with AI. And they've built the structure on a number of platforms where it pulls from just doctrine. So it's on a closed learning model, I think is the correct term. Large language learning models. So you put the information in and it only pulls from those things. So that was incredibly beneficial. And I am a huge fan of anything that takes a person out of the mix, because for very dangerous chemicals, you don't want to put a person in there, because if you lose them, you've lost all of that capability and education and a person. So the Italians have, and I think the US as well, and a number of nations have the dog that does remote sensing, and it walks in and it can pick up things and collect samples. And so there's a number of little robot sort of like land-based drones that go in and they can do mapping and sensing and things like that. And I think those are fantastic, because anytime you can carry it and customize it and send it in for your position, it is fantastic. We've been waiting on that for a long time. And we spend a lot of time talking about drones nowadays as well in the headquarters, because they're a threat, but also they could also be a benefit. Looking at how do you decontaminate infrastructure with drones, so you can get after the problem. You can reestablish into a place quicker if you've done the decontamination of infrastructure instead of waiting for it to weather off, which is what we tend to wait for. So I love that half of it. And an increased sensing, if you build my library bigger for a sensing capability, I'll love that too. But I am of a split mind in the sense that any technology is vulnerable. And so how do we how do we operate when we can't use our technology? You know, every staff officer is beholden to their computer. What happens when the network goes down? How do we gather information, and how do we do things if we can't use the internet, if we can't use comms, if we can't, you know, if we can't even function, because we'll be detected too quickly. So what do we do when we can't do what we always do? And that's where it's kind of a hearkening back to the basics. You have to be able to do things manually, everything. Communicate manually, semaphore, bring it on. Like, let's go with the flags and stuff again. And for CBRN specifically, how do you plot and how do you predict when you can't use the computer? And it's not going to be a beautiful model. You have to just rely on your 10K, 2K triangles. You're just going to have to go with that. And that's going to have to be how you do it. And so I love technology, but I have a value for not getting too invested in it, because someday it will fail us. And we see that still with emerging, specifically chemical agents. So as chemical agents, you know, as you use AI to create new chemical agents, because that's that classic case study where you ask AI, tell me something that I don't know about, you know, how to make a chemical agent, and it delivers 4,000 results in 4 seconds. Those problems will become reality. And so our sensors cannot keep up with that library. And so we have to know how to detect at the basic level. So if my paper says it's red and that's a nerve agent, then I'm going off my paper and maybe not off my automatic sensor, because it doesn't have it in the library. So we have to be able to do both. And it's such a challenge because we are so reliant on technology. It's not a positive thing, I think, in this day and age, but I feel like someday we're going to need to know how to do everything by hand again.
Well, yeah, no, it's a sobering, point, but you're hitting it spot on. And again, when it comes to some of these crisis situations, let's just say, yeah, I mean, how much we can rely on ChatGPT to guide us versus old-fashioned thinking. But yeah, again, this segues nicely, of course, because when you're headed off again tomorrow to Steadfast Wolf, you're going to be doing that exercise, but then a month later you're going to be back here in DC at the annual joint CBRN symposium, and Ian Watson and Tanya McGonigal and a lot of the folks on the show are going to be presenting with you. Talk a little bit. I mean, what are you going to be presenting about? What's the theme this year in terms of what you're going to be teaching everybody about what's happening in Brunssum and other things that you're learning from the exercises? And tell us what's happening in Washington next month.
Sure. So I don't know exactly, because I know I'll be a part of a panel, and they're pretty prestigious, and I'm pretty certain that I have met the Ukrainian representative coming at a number of previous speaking engagements, and he is fantastic. So I look forward to partnering with him on that. I don't know the other 2 people on our panel, but our focus is on multinational cooperation for CBRN. That's basically the bottom line for it. And how do you get nations to work together? And so, the Ukrainians will come with fantastic examples, like real concrete examples. I think we can all take as lessons. I hope to convey how you work with many nations together. How do you get everybody to make a decision, knowing that they all come from, like previously said, different capabilities, different cultures, different histories, different approaches to everything. And so how do we make a plan when everybody gets a say? And it's not always just, I told you so, it's what you'll do. It's meeting people and meeting nations where they are and conveying that correctly. And so for CBRN, it's a challenge because everybody does it a different way. There are some fundamental things, but if you just took decontamination as an example, there are many approaches to decontamination. Some is just remove, remove, remove. Some is wet decontamination. Some are beholden to dry decontamination. And so you can't say one is better than the other because everybody exists in a different environment. And so how do we as NATO come up with an idea that is cohesive to all and acceptable to all? And so that is what I hopefully will get after. But I know that there's going to be some very great questions. And I have not presented at this conference before. I've not attended it before either. So I'm really looking forward to it. And it's been a while since I've been in DC.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, no, it definitely. I've never attended it either, but from the folks I've talked to, they always have a really good time and learn from, again, great minds, getting together and sharing this knowledge, especially the type of knowledge that you're accumulating there at the NATO center there in the Netherlands, and again, all these different perspectives. So it should be exciting, and I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
And what else should we be on the lookout for? So, obviously exercises next month, CBRN symposia in March. Anything else that's public facing that we should know about coming up in the next couple of months of 2026 as pertaining to any of these topics we talked about? And then, aside from that, and I'll just throw this one to you, advice, thinking back now, because we come 20 some odd years, any advice for sort of the junior officers that are maybe listening to the show that, maybe thinking about CBRN? Not yet, but obviously we need more great minds like yours getting involved. Any messages to them while we have you?
Yeah. So coming up for my headquarters, NATO is going to take JFC Brunssum is going to take a good look at hybrid discussions. And so there is an initiative now through the Force Protection branch, so the branch that I'm part of, to look at the hybrid threat and how do we approach that, specifically drones, counter UAS, counter maritime UAS, but also emerging technologies. So what else is coming up on the radar? And that's coming out of our counter IED cell, who are wonderful officers within my branch of JFC, who we've moved out. Counter IED was an emerging threat a few years ago, and now it's become routine. And so they're revolutionizing their section to get after things that are coming on in the future. And so how do we as a force protection section and branch help with the hybrid threats, the emerging threats, things like that? And so the definition of hybrid, I know, is contentious. It's contentious everywhere because everybody has a different definition. So that is coming out, and I'm sure that from that will come really fantastic exercises and discussions with the centers of excellence. So the hybrid COE is supporting that initiative, and so most of NATO is looking at what comes next. What should we expect to look at next? So that's where we're going. We have more exercises coming up. We're kind of changing it up every year and trying to get better and better, because we've really had a rejuvenation since 2022. So the headquarters is getting after modernizing and becoming a warfighting headquarters that we hope to never have to do. So, and advice, that's so hard to choose. I think, I think for people choosing either to join the military now, it's always a good choice to join the military. You don't have to do it forever. You can do it for 3 years. You can do it for 5 years. You can do it for 20 years. You can do it for 30 years. When you do it, you join something that has meaning and it has purpose. And so it's never a bad choice. And I highly recommend it because it teaches you discipline. It gives you access to education that may be out of reach in other realms. And it gives you real life experience, not necessarily always a deployment, but real life use of your professional choice in the military. So you will use it. But also you don't have to follow the traditional paths laid out for you. We have so many people in the military that say, oh, the path is this, I must follow this path and I must do these things. And sometimes the best experiences and the best jobs are when you step off that path and say, you know what, that's not for me right now. And I'm willing to take the consequences of that step off the path. And I'm willing to try something different. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. I will not pretend like it was easy choices. It's really terrifying to be the only one making that decision, and all your peers have stayed on the path and they're getting the jobs and they're doing the things, and you're over here doing your own thing all by yourself. It's not easy, but in the end, it's almost always rewarding, because if you do the work, if you put in the effort, and if you're committed to it, it like 9 times out of 10, it pays off. And sometimes you have to just be content to be where you are. I had a really great mentor who asked me, do I want to be someone, or do I want to do something? And it sounds like a weird question, and it takes a minute to ponder it. And I tried to answer too quickly, and he's like, no, slow down. Think about that. Do you want to be somebody, or do you want to do something? And he came at it from his own point of view, where he said, I only ever wanted to be a battalion commander. And when I got there, I didn't know what to do with myself afterwards. I wanted to be someone, and I didn't know how to do something after that. And so I said, well, I want to do something. I'd rather do good work and things that are meaningful and things that I find valuable and things that are valuable to the greater organizations than be someone. I'm content to be Lieutenant Colonel Erin Maurer forever if I'm doing good work. And so those are really hard decisions to make. And if you know what you want to do, if you know yourself early on, you can definitely help guide yourself through some, like the field grade years, when there's so much pressure to make decisions on your future, when you're like, I don't even know who I am yet. So I think those would probably be the best advice.
Yeah, it's awesome advice. And I mean, you are clearly doing, I mean, it's more than good work that you're doing. You're doing amazing work. It's just so impressive, again, you know, listening to your journey. And I just, you know, I wish you, your team there, the best with this as you continue to learn, to do these exercises, to enhance our military and obviously those of our allies in this very important era we're in. But really impressive stuff, Erin. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Lieutenant Colonel Erin Maurer, CBRN Defense Lead, J3 Force Protection at NATO Joint Force Command in Brunssum, Netherlands. Erin, I really want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today about your journey. Thank you for everything you do to keep our country, our world safer. And as we like to say, thanks for creating a better and safer tomorrow for all of us. And of course, thank you for your long service to the United States. It's a really awesome story, and I look forward to continue to follow your journey.
No, thank you so much, Ira. Thank you for having me. It is really an honor.
Really great having you.